It was pretty late at night. There I was, sitting in a dark room with my computer monitor being the only source of light. I was doing what anyone else would do late at night and browsing YouTube. The usual late night culprits were there, a few horror videos, hour-long video essays about speed running a game I'm never gonna play, and of course some jams. At this point in time, I was in my indie rock phase, the typical Vacations, Plums, Vansire. It was good vibes all around, until that fateful recommendation piqued my interest, bickering a click as it stood pretty obviously to the side of the tab. It was a song by the name Mr. Kill Myself. An otherwise droning piece of music exemplified by atmospheric drums, and I was hooked. After a few minutes on Google, I came to the conclusion that what I was listening to was none other than breakcore, a niche internet genre, or at least that's what I thought it was. Now, before you click off the video, what I was listening to was not actually breakcore, and my perception of it was misconstrued by what I thought I was listening to. Everything with a breakbeat was considered breakcore, from video game OSTs to any regular jungle piece. But for a good chunk of time, I didn't know that. For some context, let's go back to the year in 2022. At that point, the music that I was listening to was already heavily inspired by the late night sprawl. I already amassed a pretty big playlist of quote-unquote breakcore music. I was silently following online artists on Twitter, and I was even catching on to the memes. So, with my newfound interest, I did the good old video treatment, whipping up together a script and immediately getting to work on some editing. March 26, I uploaded a video called Breakcore, the internet's craziest genre, using the same girl in the thumbnail of the video that first got me into music. As it brewed within the algorithm, it festered into probably my biggest and yet most controversial video. I got a lot of love from that video, and was the only one where I received numerous encouraging DMs. People thanked me for creating the video. They wanted to strike up a good conversation about the genre. But on the other side of the spectrum, a lot of criticism was festering without me knowing. Obviously, no one's gonna tell me that I'm wrong to my face, so a few tweets and some backlash later, I was feeling pretty mixed on this video, and so that's why I stopped making them, because frankly, I hated what I just made. I hated everything I made, because after some deep retrospection, I became the thing I never wanted to become, another pseudo-intellectual video essayist. Some pretentious guy who thought he knew everything niche and hip because he was involved in it for a brief period of time. I misrepresented many genres of music. I couldn't properly get my thoughts across on the Sweet Trip video. The funk video I did was full of research holes. I even had a generic Death Grips video essay that every fake smart guy created. So I took a break, and I swore to myself that I would never make another video until I redeemed myself on the topic of breakcore. So here's what I found. One of the oldest questions posted on the genre of breakcore is, well, what is breakcore? I wasn't the first guy to think of this, as an old Soulseek thread asked the exact same question. It essentially recorded the conversations of various enthusiasts of the genre. You had some direct answers, some sillier ones, and just some straight up insane answers. A few conversations archived here and there, but the responses told me more about the culture than the genre itself.
I would say it's sort of halfway between gabba and jungle. I would broadly define it. I think if it has elements of both of those things, I would say that constitutes breakcore. I think it's kind of one of those things where you know it when you hear it, if that makes sense.
Well, I think this is probably the most complicated question that you could ask. I think no one really knows at this point. I think like even back when I started, it was like really, like it became like a sort of meme in like breakcore groups to be like, so what is breakcore, and you would have people like argue over it, and that was in like, 2011, 2012.
I came to a similar conclusion when I watched the infamous documentary Notes on Breakcore. The description of the video essentially told me that breakcore was an amalgam of various genres in the electronic scene. This was one of the many opinions that floated throughout the otherwise laid-back production style of the documentary. A lot of lax interviews and little substance regarding the definition of the genre itself. I once again familiarized myself with the spirit and the people of the genre rather than the genre itself. It came to me that this question of asking what breakcore was a bit fruitless when asking for just a straight lexical definition. A lot of people claim that breakcore is simply essentially a fast EDM genre with breakbeats, experimental instrumentation, and a high BPM. The problem is that definition can also be used to describe hectic jazz works, which features fast breakbeats, experimental instrumentation, and high BPM. In a landscape so full of uncertainty, there is one thing that we can be pretty sure of, which is the first quintessential breakcore album. Alec Empire is a special case, and 1996's The Destroyer is one of the many different sounding albums in this long, self-accomplished discography. But what made The Destroyer so different was its extreme breakbeats and abrasive sampling. It's an angry, fast-paced, high-energy album that does its due diligence to smack the listener upon first listen. There's an underlying punk attitude to The Destroyer that shouldn't really be surprising for Mr. Empire, since his band Atari Teenage Riot has been producing hardcore punk music since '92. It is possible that the anti-establishment attitude of Atari Teenage Riot fused its way into The Destroyer, thus giving it a signature sound compared to more contemporary works later down that line. Keep in mind that jungle, gabber, and various other EDM influences on The Destroyer were not invented by Alec Empire. Alec did not, in fact, invent breakcore. In fact, a lot of the other artists at the time were also experimenting with these genres. It should also be noted that Alec Empire wanted this genre to be called digital hardcore. Digital to denote the EDM elements matched with the rambunctious punk nature of hardcore music. It makes more sense to look at The Destroyer as an essential landmark album in the scene that was starting to develop. Earlier works of his, such as digital hardcore or bass terror, could be accredited for the feat. Alec's ideas of creating a crazier style of EDM wasn't an original idea either. Many people argue that great pioneers such as DJ Scud truly finalized the sound. Other artists were also pushing the extremes of the sound back then, such as Christoph de Babylon and Nassim Bluten. But according to other sources, although this point in time can be described as the infantile stages of breakcore, we don't really get to see its contemporary version until later down the line. This is Each Kurt's Guide to Electronic Music, an extremely detailed timeline encompassing all of electronic music, its genres, and even its respective subgenres. It's an ambitious project that has been worked on by a dedicated lot of enthusiasts, powered by their own first-hand accounts in the electronic scene and a lot of time on Discogs. And upon first glance, the most interesting part about the placement of breakcore on the timeline was its apparent offshoot from the IDM genre, being a product of the drill and bass movement. Ironically enough, IDM is probably an even harder genre to categorize, since it isn't bound by a specific set of production rules, and the quote-unquote intelligent moniker is highly relative. But even if you listen to a lot of contemporary breakcore, you'll notice that IDM may not be its sole influence. Breakbeat hardcore and its split-offs such as jungle and gabber was where the chaos in the music was first considered. Breakcore would somewhat pick and choose elements from these vast cultures to define its sound. For example, the raga jungle sound was very much alive and well within popular breakcore artists. Shitmat's One Foot in the Rave very much leans on its raga jungle influences, while artists such as Venetian Snares have multiple albums peppered with reggae sampling. It's also safe to say that there are even more genres that have influenced the sound of breakcore, gabber being a notable example. Some artists have incorporated even industrial and metal sounds into their music, such as drumcore. All of this points back as to why Ishkur puts breakcore as a successor of drill and bass and IDM. To put it in no better words, drill and bass was IDM mixed with drum and bass. Breakcore, its successor, is IDM mixed with hardcore, with some industrial seasoning and thrash metal to taste. IDM is an essential element to creating breakcore, and although hardcore artists such as Alec Empire could have gotten close in accidentally making it, the drill and bass influences come in from none other than huge names such as Aphex Twin, Squarepusher, where their works oftentimes blur the line between the end of drill and bass and the beginning of breakcore.
Well, I mean, breakcore started as like a very political music genre, like in the 90s. Like it was extremely political, you know, like sort of like counterculture, like punk kind of thing, you know. So in that sense, I think that that definitely used to be true. but then once it opened up a little bit more, like in sort of like the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and it became more like a sort of hard dance music genre, I guess. There wasn't really like a lot of like ethos still in there, I think there's probably artists that have a strong ethos, but like as a genre, I would struggle to come up with like a unifying thing.
Squarepusher's album Go Plastic is a good example of the drill and bass genre. According to Ishkur, drill and bass loved sampling the infamous Amen break just as much as the drum and bass cousin did. The main difference being that laying out the infamous 6-second loop without texture is too boring for IDM snobs, so they took to sampling each individual hit of the Amen, the kick, the snare, the hi-hat, the cymbal, and resequenced them into new patterns with heavy texturization and circuit bending and noise tweaking and distortion and other studio gimmickry. The end result of drill and bass were super complex, fast-paced tracks, but a criticism that Ishkur likes to bring up was that it was just complicated for the sake of it, and ended up sounding busy and schizophrenic like Jackson Pollock art. And after all this, I asked myself, why was there such a sudden shift to IDM when breakcore was starting to grow? And this trend continued with quite a few more notable artists.
That's great, but at the same time, has this breakcore become a product? Has it become a brand,
Venetian Snares, aka Aaron Funk, is regarded as one of the most notable breakcore artists to this date, probably being the most accessible artist. His massive discography boasts a collection of electronic music that would popularize the sound of breakcore. Many people in this scene consider him to be instrumental in the success of the genre, with some of his earlier stuff already embodying the extreme nature of breakcore. Although, just like many other electronic artists, V-Snares also dabbled in genres other than breakcore. His 2001 Songs About My Cats is a 14-track journey attempting to scratch the sensory itches within your brain. Personally, I think that the 2003's Chocolate Wheelchair album showcases where V-Snares created the contemporary breakcore sound. The most unique work that people accredit V-Snares for is combining the breakcore genre with classical music. RCAS is probably the most famous example of this, and in my opinion hosts one of the most brilliant pieces of music I've ever heard. High Now is a near 8-minute track that perfectly encapsulates the storytelling of classical music with the organized chaos of breakcore. This song really feels like it has a beginning, middle, and end, with notable peaks and valleys in between. Venetian Snares seamlessly mixes the samples together to form what sounds like an original piece, and within the first few minutes you get a taste of not only classical music, the jazz elements that subtly come in later. And just as the listener may start to lose interest, the drums kick in nearly halfway through the track, ramping up tension for something greater that lies ahead. The track suddenly halts to a silence before dropping. This is the highest point of the track, showcasing the incredible drum patterning. The careful use of pitch shifting and chopping creates a beat that can complement the fast strings. Before the segment overstays its welcome, it transitions to a calmer part of the track, while still maintaining the tension. Akin to a dying star, with its radiance disappearing, it slowly fades out, with the same strings that got the song started, ending the exciting listen that is High Now. The craziest part is I only really dived into the surface level of what Venetian Snares has to offer. His fans have come to vastly different favorite conclusions, with no top 10 list being definitive in any manner. During the peak of his popularity within the mid-2000s, he was producing albums year after year after year, and each and every single one of his projects put a unique twist that separated it from the last one. Although he may be synonymous with creating the contemporary sound of breakcore, his ability to continuously innovate and excite the listener makes him an excellent artist within the electronic scene all around. Detrimentalist sounds different from traditional synthesizer music, which sounds different from the Chocolate Wheelchair album, etc. And although there may be people that think Venetian Snares may be only the surface level of breakcore, they cannot deny the fact that the cultural impact he has had on popularizing the genre. So, in a genre that has been cultivated by an accomplished artist, what does he have to say about breakcore itself?
The definition of a good breakcore you start you start with like a scary sound, like, and then you get like sort of crazy with your beats. You're like, right, and then you like say something like scary, maybe like, oh, you're a freaked out child in the woods, and then you do that again. You go like, and that's pretty much it.
The most striking part of this interview was the otherwise nonchalant attitude towards making music in general. It really seemed like this guy was just trying to have fun. Referencing back to the Ishkur guide, his theory as to how Aaron is able to pump out so much quality music is simply boredom and isolation. And since the breakcore genre is all about taking from others and giving it the crazy breakbeat treatment, Aaron was essentially a guy with a bunch of music equipment constantly experimenting like a mad scientist. His influence and prowess weren't only limited to him, as he did a lot for the community at large, being part of labels such as Planet Mew. Besides V Snares and Alec Empire, many artists have contributed to the culture of breakcore to build the contemporary scene to what it is before the internet changed its perception. Bong Ra and his project New Millennium Dreads is an important piece of breakcore history. He's one of the oldest artists to be in the scene as it grew throughout the late 90s and helped shape the sound as it is today, and you can clearly hear it in his music. Deep, guttural jungle and some killer breaks. While New Millennium breaks may sound pretty tame to what was to come, the template of this production style and Bong Ra's continuous innovation in his long discography enabled the community to thrive. As breakcore started to formulate around the early 2000s, artists such as Venetian Snares were developing it from the perspective of the IDM genre, but artists like Henry Collins, aka Shitmat, were having fun with breakcore's ragged jungle roots. You may know Shitmat as the artist who created the fantastic album One Foot in the Rave, but his breakcore projects such as Full English Breakfast are what in my opinion established his creative sound. According to his own Spotify page, Shitmat is a tasteless moniker on the happy hardcore godfather Slipmat, creating plunderphonic breakcore. He was also part of the Planet Mew label, and throughout his career he carried on the fun pop culture sampling style. The spirit of fun-loving sampling is carried on through modern acts like Golden Boy, an important artist I'll talk about later. Besides Bong Ra and Henry, we have two personal favorites of mine, Drumcore, aka Aaron Spector, and Igor, the two artists that come to mind when I think of metal's influence into the breakcore genre. Drumcore is spotted a few times in the breakcore documentary, and for good reason. Aaron is a super talented guy, sometimes even creating his own samples and doing his own lyrics. His old works really show Aaron's good use of drills and chops, along with the underlying glitchiness that follows all of his albums to create texture. His newer works, like his 2020 EP Create the Future, hones in breakcore and a more glitchiness than previously heard, along with elements of chiptune to create a pleasantly static EP. In the same year, he made another EP called The Quickening, featuring more of his metal and industrial roots. His metal, alias Drumcore, allows a considerable amount of breakcore in his earlier work, with his later outings drifting away from the electronic influences in favor for more metal. The best part about Aaron's use of metal is that it's completely unique, because artists like Igor use it in an entirely different way. Although Igor may be popular in the metal scene, his 2010 album Nostril successfully blends a mixture of baroque, metal, and breakcore into one cohesive package. Unlike the glitchy, almost low-fidelity sound that Aaron produces, Igor's production is crystal clear by comparison. Igor, in comparison to other breakcore artists, is unique in the sense that he's Frankenstein music together in a manner that sets it apart from his projects from the other ones. In his latest album, Spirituality and Distortion, Igor exchanges the established Baroque theme for more Eastern-style tracks like Camel Dance Floor, but bits and pieces of his electronic prowess still show through, especially in the track Very Noise. Despite being such a niche genre, even in the light of its newfound popularity, I found that there is an overwhelming amount of breakcore that needs to be noted, so I'll just list off a few more of my favorites that I think need to be mentioned. Invasion from the XXX Dimension features a wide array of classic artists and mixes. Collaboration albums are very common in breakcore, with various artists contributing their own styles. These can include labels such as System Correct, Bloody Fist, Kitty on Fire, and the aforementioned Planet Mew. Wrong Music, Cock Rock Disco, Murder Channel, Superbad Meaty Breaks, Dancecore, Suck Puck Records, and tons more others that you can find on various forums recommending breakcore. And as for the artists, well, here we go. Acronym DJ Scud, Dormouse, Duran Duran Duran, Devnol, Kid606, Rotator, Toe Cutter, End Users, Adapticon, Nero's Day at Disneyland, Gorshit, Ruby My Dear, Rizico CJ, Autovon Siroc, FFF, TechDiff, Droon, Drop the Line, numerous others. We've got albums, projects, tracks like Bass Terror, It's Not Unusual, Kill Sound Before It Kills You, and its successor, Who Still Kill Sound. We got V-Snares albums, another V-Snare album, lots of V-Snares albums, Semantics, The Benzo Chronicles, From Zero, more Venetian Snares projects. Alright, I'm done. So, in my quest to find out what breakcore really is, I was left with some uncertain history. The godfather of the genre essentially saying he didn't really care about those semantics, and some more cool artists to listen to. To understand what breakcore really is, you really have to understand what it's not. Breakcore has had somewhat of a change in reputation over the years. A recent article titled Demystifying the Internet's Breakcore Revival shed light on a cultural shift within the internet's landscape. Breakcore started off as a harsh niche genre pioneered under hardcore as shown by Alec Empire's works. It develops further with Venetian Snares and a slew of other artists to the genre within the 2000s. But besides those relatively respective periods and their artists, breakcore stayed pretty underground. But the scene didn't really see a revival until the 2010s and so on, when people mistakenly labeled new creative acts as the genre. The most notable example of this mislabeling was when Wolf Girl started to take place as a cult classic. Wolf Girl and Machine Girl in general can be very easily mistaken for breakcore, since oftentimes Machine Girl embraces a similar spirit to it. The most interesting part about breakcore was that its identity was no longer founded within its limit-pushing sound, but rather the aesthetics that was tacked on by Generation Z.
Some people will apply the term breakcore to something that really is sort of just drum and bass. Some people will do that with something that really could just be described as speedcore. It's hard to say. I think it's more of a community thing than a specific sound these days.
I used to moderate. I'm still moderator, but I'm not really active on there anymore. But I used to moderate the biggest breakcore group on Facebook, and just like everyone that joins now is like, Sewerslvt and all of those it was people that I've never heard of. It's just, I don't know. I think that those people are probably gonna have like a pretty bad time, because like a lot of the stuff that's posted in there is still stuff that I consider breakcore. So they wanna this sort of like ambient, nice, sort of pleasant music to study to or whatever, and then they're like confronted with like horrifically offensive noise. That's the most I can say to it. I don't think it's like an emotionally charged thing, and I think that people that get upset about it, they, I don't know.
There is definitely a consistent theme amongst the SoundCloud artists and small Twitter startups. Depressed anime profile pictures, distorted serial experiments, lane fan art. Generation Z and their pockets of social media such as TikTok has transformed this once innovative genre into another internet trend, one that creates the illusion to young teens into thinking that they're different than everyone else. To quote Mike Hollis in the article, the bending of breakbeat, glitching it out, or incorporating different sounds, it feels like that this has been lost. And the popularization of this change in the genre has been consistently led to one person, that artist being none other than Sewerslvt. There are a few reasons people don't like Sewerslvt, and it could be the artist's contribution to transforming the image of breakcore to something less desirable, but probably one of the biggest offenses has to be what she's done in the past. Sewerslvt's most popular criticism is probably her racism, with the most notable example being an old 2017 album that's just the hard R. It's an hour of meme mashup music and was posted under her previous monocle, Sad Boy Sheldon. And at this point in time, Sewerslvt was only 16 years old when it came out. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into the controversy of this album and the way she carried herself within earlier years, as it becomes a discussion about what to do with an artist and their art. There are tons of other videos on YouTube that do a way better job explaining at least the history of Sewerslvt and her past controversies. Sad Boy Sheldon was a product of the internet during its Wild West era. It's up to you whether or not you decide that objectionable content at that time should be held up to the standards we have today. Controversy aside, Sewerslvt is popular for the same genre that has so many names. People have tried to coin it Sewercore. Rim tried to label it as depressive breakcore. Spotify calls it glitch break. A subreddit tried to call it drum and bass. but at the end of the day, Sewerslvt and the artist she has inspired is merely ambient or atmospheric jungle. I'm inclined to agree with the detractors with one big caveat. There is a noticeable difference from traditional atmospheric jungle than the stuff Sewerslvt and co are making. Just give it a quick listen. Jungle sounds clearer in production compared to any of Sewerslvt's works, and the DIY nature of her projects really shines through on some of these albums. Her heavy use of reverb, depressing samples, and more chaotic drum work act to purposely distort the track, and although it may sound less clean, the use of distortion admittedly accomplishes the main goal of contributing to the aesthetic and the attitude of the music. If you haven't already noticed, Sewerslvt's music is depressing and full of angst. Their albums go into various taboo topics such as suicide and drug abuse. The last album, being We Had a Lot of Good Times Together, Don't Forget That, is about the loss of someone near and dear, and is an album about grief. One of the main criticisms of Sewerslvt's music is that the otherwise very consistent theming can be lampooned for being unoriginal and repetitive. And while I may be inclined to agree, seeing as listening to one Sewerslvt song essentially tells you what the rest may sound like, there has been an increasing hate for the music and the flavor of dark jungle Sewerslvt has created, with similar artists getting lampooned online for the style. And while I may no longer be a fan of Sewerslvt, mostly because I grew out of the style and favor for what I think is a better produced jungle, I can't help but pity the impact the music has had on people. Look at any of the comments on any one of Sewerslvt's songs. It's full of people who are hurting, lost, and broken. And who am I to invalidate someone loving a song if it helps them deal with something else? Is it possible that these people are just angsty teens? Maybe. Is it possible that it's still morally wrong to feel such a deep connection to an artist that has had a really offensive past? Perhaps so, but one thing's for sure. Sewerslvt has had an irreversible grip on the latest generation, despite the fact that she may not truly be breakcore.
Oh, shit.
I Never Meant for This to Happen is a 10-song romp into one of the most interesting modern breakcore projects ever. Produced by Perix Alexander, aka Golden Boy, I'd give it the title as one of my favorite breakcore albums. It was previously stated that breakcore is a solid mix of IDM and hardcore music, but although these genres may be baked into the essence of breakcore traditionally, artists have given the liberty to add their own flares to the music, and Golden Boy is no different. I Never Meant for This to Happen includes elements of gabber, trance, happy hardcore, and much more. It's a super fun album featuring energetic breaks, masterful sampling, and a consistent wacky atmosphere all throughout. If the ethos of breakcore was to have fun in underground raves, Golden Boy continues the spirit of it while still maintaining their own original twist. Golden Boy is special to breakcore, especially in the modern scene because she was one of the greatest examples of bearing the torch that Snares and other artists set. The chaotic, fast undertones of breakcore are intrinsically masked under a coat of bright Y2K paint. Golden Boy's discography consists of super eclectic styles of EDM, with each album sounding different than the last, yet keeping consistent with theme. There has been a clear influence from her work into the sound of modern breakcore. Another notable example I can think of is none other than the artist By2. Their album Teeth Restoration is my favorite of their projects. One of the special parts about this album is the amount of brief, atmospheric interludes lined after every other track labeled prayers. At first, this may seem like an annoying method of padding, but if you listen to the album from beginning to end, you realize that these interludes are there for practical reasons. By2 boasts an average song time in this album of around 6 minutes, for the actual tracks in their list, with the longest track being 7 minutes and a half. You'd think that these long songs pose a problem for the genre that requires fast, complex production in a small amount of time, but each track wonderfully accommodates for such a long runtime. By2 has been able to create marathon-like songs that constantly transition between melodies, breakbeats, and creative samples on a whim. Tracks like Kotu Tasvan transition between 10 different beats, each of which you could separate into their own song. Every single one of By2's songs within Teeth Restoration are all like this, and more importantly, it doesn't really seem to get old. Each song is their own long listen, containing numerous samples from pop culture to the underground, and features well-crafted, unique beats. Their previous album, Ghostworm, also boasts long, impressive songs, excluding the interludes. And their latest album, Metamorphose, not only takes advantage of the long tracks, but is peppered with smaller, calmer tracks that shows the listener that By2 can work within any length. I already mentioned Invasion from the XXX Dimension, and a modern equivalent to that has to be the Breakcore 2 by the Normcore. Featuring a ton of new artists, I think that this collaboration album is the modern day equivalent, and really shows that the Y2K sentimentality and aesthetics that people freak out over can be melded into an innovative product. Modern day artists like Nanoray, Vertigo Away, and Casper McFadden, a lot like their older brothers, don't exclusively create breakcore, but just love to experiment and create within the EDM scene. The more controversial parts of modern breakcore has to be its anime influences. From the mislabeled style that Sewerslvt brought to the casual SoundCloud artists, this sudden change in aesthetic got quite the rise out of older fans of the genre. Slowly but surely, the keep anime out of breakcore sentiment was floating around online, with numerous forum posts complaining about modern images of breakcore.
Well, what I will say is that I think when DJ Sammy, rest in peace, when he made that image, he was joking.
Yeah, I've
he
heard
was just trying to annoy people. I think the reason, as far as I can tell, when people don't like the sort of anime and breakcore thing, it's just because they don't like anime. Like, anime is a very, love it or hate it kind of thing. It's probably quite frustrating to have this sort of other thing that you might not necessarily be a fan of kind of shoved down your throat because you like a different thing. I have the cassette of that album behind me.
Although it's hard to pinpoint when and how this came from, the most popular artist that probably popularized this style has to be none other than Gorshit. Gorshit is one of the more notable names of the newer era. His 2015 album Semantics, The Benzo Chronicles, is in my opinion probably his most authentic breakcore outing. But Leon boasts a wide and colorful discography. Unfortunately, for a lot of his releases, people have had the displeasure of wrongly labeling it lollycore. Ishkur more fittingly calls this J-core, with his production switching to a more happy hardcore flavor, thoroughly laden with anime sampling. A continuous slew of J-core continued to develop in his discography, and due to how the word lolly has been shaped over the internet over the years, looking back at these albums and the subgenre of lollycore is now shown under a negative light.
The term lollycore comes from like image board culture. In the mid 2000s, it was never really supposed to be something that many people I think knew about. It was one of those things, it was sort of an in-joke for like maybe a couple of hundred people in this culture of 4chan where everyone's just kind of a bit edgy. All that's happened there is that it's massively escaped containment, and people are now aware of it who I think wouldn't have been okay with it if they'd known what it was. I think that's all it is. It's just the breakcore and in general has become sort of way more popular than it was not supposed to, but I guess designed to.
Mixed messages aside, the music has the same production as breakcore: gabber kicks, drills, heavy sampling, and of course the breaks, but with a huge emphasis on bright, colorful production and anime sampling. It's no question that his influence on the genre has really shaped to see how we see breakcore today, and anime is still very much a strong influence on the genre, whether people like it or not. There's still quite a few other artists out there that innovate outside of the sphere, and no other artist does this better than Ruby My Dear. Just like many of the other artists in this video, Ruby My Dear continues to innovate and push the genre in new directions. If you look at the technical prowess and the drum work of Venetian Snares and combined it with the creativity and wackiness of Igor, Ruby My Dear would be its perfect love child. Just like many other artists, this single-man act boasts a wide discography, with his early works consisting of a few solid singles and EPs. Ruby My Dear sticks to his IDM roots more than the other modern artists I've mentioned here, with some albums featuring mixes of experimental techno, glitch, and of course breakcore. Pushing the breakcore side, many people, including myself, have been mistaking various types of jungle and drum and bass with the genre of breakcore. So, what have we been listening to? If you've been paying attention to online communities, jungle has been getting increasingly popular within smaller circles. Going back to that Bandcamp article I mentioned earlier, they coined the term Y2K sentimentality, being one of the main aesthetic choices for many of these modern day artists. And they aren't wrong. So many of these artists are inspired by Y2K art and everything that came along with it. Many of these artists were captured by their early childhoods and the drum and bass music that consumed them so much of the media back then. It only seems fitting that this revival in jungle and drum and bass music is pioneered by nostalgia and aesthetics. We've seen similar patterns within internet culture before, vaporwave being the first example to come to mind. So although it may not be breakcore, this era of electronic music is somewhat of a unique one, recycling the sounds of their early childhood and giving them a chance in the modern world. An artist that I've been following for quite some time has been none other than Sewerslvt. On their Spotify page, they claim that the project was born out of a love for all styles of hardcore EDM, whether that be old school or new school. Whether it was the melodiousness of happy hardcore or the blistering and uncompromising sound of gabber. And above all else, the project is a reaction against the predominantly uber-ironic nature of internet music scenes and styles. Sewerslvt essentially summarized the music that we've been listening to. What sets Kaizo apart is that they not only draw from the aesthetics of the 90s, but the production shows a deep understanding of 90s EDM. You can clearly see within their discography, the first few EPs of the Kaizo demos utilize a creative blend of ambient footwork, jungle, and other genres, wrapped under N64 aesthetics. Past Volume 4, we get a few EPs, and in 2022, their debut album, The Kaizo Manifesto, came out. 2023 introduced How Are We Feeling Today, which in my opinion is the most interesting album of their discography, since the contrast between the Kaizo demos and this album is so huge. Although other artists may not vigorously follow the same eclectic philosophy that Sewerslvt showcases, there's still many other acts out there that continue the 90s and 2000s aesthetic. Artists like DVI and Naked Flames are doing an incredible job preserving the music of earlier scenes. DVI really runs away with the Y2K aesthetics and formulates an entire discography off of it. My favorite EP, Research and Development, sounds like the soundtrack for a Sega CD game. Naked Flames preserves the dance and techno influences, pumping out track after track of blissful rhythm. A lot of the tracks are put through low fidelity filters to give the illusion of listening on an old car radio. With the persistence of this jungle revival, the old school scene has also seen some life as well. One of the best artists carrying over this style is Lone. Lone carries over techno and jungle roots and marries them together into a funky and fast-paced product. He also consistently utilizes jazz step and ambient sounds as well. Lone's albums consist of tightly packed thematic tracks, most of which have nearly every track being as catchy as the last one. Levitate is a prime example of this, featuring 9 solid tracks of ethereal bliss. Other artists such as Dev Knoll and Tim Reaper, who have collaborated on a few occasions, also keep up the spirit of jungle to this day. On the opposite side of the coin, artists like Boys Hotel throw away their idealistic bliss of an artist like Lone and Naked Flames in favor of showing the audience a deep, gritty flavor of dark jungle. Boys Hotel is mainly drum work accompanied with a sinister droning that perpetuates most of the tracks. In this manner, I think that the dark, edgy production that Sewerslvt made popular is way more refined within a Boys Hotel EP.
Acid.
Throughout the course of this video, we've discussed the origins of breakcore, influential artists in both new and old times, and the current status of the genre as it stands under a sort of pseudo-revival. But the heart of the matter is still present. What is breakcore? And this question really stumped me for quite some time. That was at least before reading Andrew Welland's work, Breakcore, Identity, and Interaction on Peer-to-Peer. Welland's work is a 300-page ethnographic review on all things breakcore and breakcore adjacent. Within the first chapter of the book, more specifically in section 1.2, we'll get probably the most concise definition of breakcore we've heard so far, where breakcore is a post-rave hybrid musical style privileging percussive intensity and complexity, which draws, among other things, on 8-bit or chiptune music, DNB, gabber techno, heavy metal, hip-hop, IDM, industrial, and jungle. A punk DIY aesthetic significantly informs the genre. But this relatively small definition, while understandable on the surface, requires much more needed context with regards to breakcore. Because what I figured out is that breakcore doesn't exist under a rigid definition on production, but it's also loosely defined by an ethos and a culture. Within the same section, Welland likes to say that breakcore is a decentralized institution that is guided by 3 things: individual artists, the overall scene as a whole, and most importantly, peer-to-peer distribution. distribution. P2P, or peer-to-peer distribution, as outlined in Chapter 2.1 of the book, allows the user to transmit and send information in a decentralized manner to other people. This is largely guided by the artists who are in the scene, since oftentimes songs, samples, beats, and other resources are shared through the web among individual users. In the book, they are coined bedroom producers. Bedroom referring to the amateur nature of the artist, and P2P interaction being their driving resource to create music. And producer referring to the fact that they sample heavy program style of breakcore inclines the people creating it to be called producers instead of composers or musicians. This blurs the line between musicianship and technicianship. Early examples of peer-to-peer interaction taking place would be free distribution applications such as Napster with over 1 billion music files, and its future replacements Morpheus and Kazaa. Under P2P, music was seen as content rather than as products. This content is driven by individual users who are not in the professional music industry.
So my friend Pepcore, who has basically started, when I started making music, that was like one of my first sort of like friends in Breakcore. He ran the I Hate Breakcore forum for like ages. He bought the domain and, you know, kind of ran it for a while. And he was just kind of showing me around like FL Studio, like when I first started, and that was like the first step. And then like everything after that is literally just like a mixture of just like finding stuff on your own, trying to remake things, and like just getting tips from other producers, you know. Like it's like I think I was really lucky in choosing a scene that is so helpful, or used to be so helpful, you know what I mean?
I don't know, I think it's sort of anarchist in the way it's made, I would say, almost. It's very, you know, like it's sort of freedom to use whatever sounds you want, I guess, what samples you want. Does that make sense? I think that's what sort of makes something breakcore, I guess. It's just taking, you can draw sounds from literally anywhere, like any sound you hear that you like.
And there is no greater example of this than the distribution and use of the infamous loop in electronic music, the Amen break. In Chapter 8.2, Amen Brother, the book goes into massive detail about why the Amen break is important for breakcore and one of its bigger influences, jungle. The Amen break is a quote-unquote hard-driving snare and cymbal sequence from Amen My Brother by the soul group The Winstons. To quote Bong Ra when questioned about his musical development, if you're referring to breakcore/jungle, it was started in the early 90s when I heard General Levy's Incredible. I think that's the first time I heard an Amen beat, and I got hooked. There are numerous factors as to why the Amen break is so important and so widely used, but to sum it up, the complexity of the break and the interaction between snares, cymbals, and kick drums make it possible to describe Coleman as shifting the focus of attention among temporal levels in a musical perception. In other words, the way the Amen break was created allows a culture to bend and manipulate the break as if it was its own instrument. In this manner, the break can be constantly reinterpreted into different songs, as no two artists will use the break the same. And the most interesting part about the malleability of the Amen break is that even in its most rearranged form, people can still recognize it.
I think it just lends itself well to like edits, I guess. I have like a folder on my hard drive, a sample folder with amens in it, and there's probably like, I don't know, like I've cut it down massively now, but like it's like a gigabyte or 2 gigabytes of like amens. There's different things you can do with them, you know. There's just a lot of breakbeats that don't really have that sort of flexibility in the sense of, you know, how good they sound when you mangle them, I guess, you know.
Remark, a well-known junglist, is famous for shattering the Amen into thousands of pieces and putting it back together in a different sequence. And yet, the listener can still understand what the break once was. The Amen isn't the only sound signature that breakcore has. The 808 kick drum and other variants and derivatives are apparent in the sound as well, with the most notable example being the gabber kick. Tying the track together, breakcore is known for heavy sampling, with samples undergoing constant pitch shifts and speed changes to accommodate for the fast music. Wellen describes the goal of breakcore production is to keep the editing tight, a sign that the producer has mastery over the sonic material and can display technical prowess. This is in opposition to loose edits, where samples and/or breakbeats may be too temporally long, and thus lazy in comparison to someone who attends to every second. The book goes into abstract detail about how the Amen and the attempts to break it tries to hone in on the core purpose of the music, describing 2 ways music can control the listeners in time and space. In one manner, you're getting lost in the music, such as dance, where you're escaping from time. In another manner, you're entering the vivid present, where the listener's experience in that moment is quote-unquote the very form of existence of music. Wellen gives an example of this through a chat log of a guy laughing about listening to the Amen break for hours with a friend. The retrospective prospective manner in which the Amen operates through and in time, the chronotopic synchronization of musical and subjective time, where the former orders or draws out the latter in a compelling way, is demonstrated by the following.
You heard me, Dan. Me and my two pals listened to the Amen loop, you know, the one in No Remorse, for 12 hours straight. And now it's fucking 0900. Good night. Ha ha ha.
Although production is used to define breakcore, we must also understand the sample culture of breakcore. Chapter 10, Safeway Brand Breakcore, dives into not only how influences are implemented into breakcore works, but also describes the pitfalls of its sample culture. In section 10.1, there are two ways breakcore obtains its influence, the first being culture jamming and the other being piggyback branding. Culture jamming is the process at which breakcore artists takes influences from another scene and incorporates it into the base of their music. This process is typically guided by adjacent genres that the user may see fit for the chaotic nature of breakcore. Noise music would be described as a logical progression into being a base influence with breakcore. In the case of piggyback branding, this is where smaller artists will utilize something more mainstream and popular, twisting it to give an identity to themselves. This is very noticeable in artists that utilize a more plunderphonic style of sampling. Some people will use pop music samples in their music as opposed to the crate diggers who will scour obscure vinyls and the media for a sample. Chapter 10.2 outlines the uses of popular sampling as it provides an element of rebellion to breakcore. There are generally two dangers when using sampling to critique a music industry, the first of which being copyright, the second of which being the cultural consequences. Plunderphonic sampling by default assumes an oppositional stance, since it defies copyright law and recontextualizes works into different messages. Wellen claims that copyright and cultural creativity are related insofar as the former may appear to constrain the latter. This is what makes willful copyright infraction appear both culturally and politically resistant. In an ideal world, the P2P space is an autonomous system that enables the user free public access to the archives of all of human sound. P2P not only threatens the copyright establishment through distribution, but because of its ease of access, also enables home production. Moving beyond sampling, there's also a whole culture dedicated to maintaining the authenticity of breakcore as well. In Chapter 9, an antique style some nerds did, Wellen dives into the rising problem of jungle influences in breakcore. This revival of what was called ragacore is a form of breakcore which takes heavy influence from raga jungle. Although there is a continuum between breakcore and jungle, Wellen claims that there is an identifiable isogloss in them, or a point at which one genre transitions into the other. Production stamps previously mentioned, such as the tightness of the track and its sampling, can help determine what is breakcore and what is jungle. The problem with this ragacore, breakcore, jungle revival is that the scene was getting saturated with surface level music, often hearing the same boring raga sampling and amen breakbeats. Most of the music would boil down to quote-unquote decontextualized Jamaican sound class shouting. Another problem outlined in the book was that the use of raga and dancehall vocals would be presented as cultural appropriation and promotion of violent and oftentimes offensive lyricism. However, to the former point, Wellen claims that this is a form of elitism, framing LFO Demon's perspective as an alternative viewpoint to the rise of ragacore. LFO Demon claims that there is not one certain set of elements used to define a style, but every artist inventing his or her individual style. So ragacore is a fusion or a crossover of many styles getting combined in various ways. They simply sampled the music and didn't care for the background of the music at all. So for them, it didn't matter first either sampling country and western, heavy metal, or dancehall. It was just a resource to get some musical material from. From this perspective, ragacore was being created simply because people liked it, and they weren't necessarily discriminatory to using certain samples, as other bases of sampling were equally just as prone to the breakcore treatment. The music was not meant to promote bigotry and or be a form of cultural appropriation, but was rather made just because it sounded cool and provided a platform for artists to show their technical prowess. Although LFO Demon goes on to say that the inherent ethos of dance floor and jungle is to be more danceable than experimental, which is in stark contrast to what breakcore tries to accomplish, this thus makes ragacore more easily consumable to many people than normal breakcore. The most important part of LFO Demon's perspective is that breakcore must be protected by keeping it quote-unquote underground. This is done in order to prevent commercialization, which will depreciate its subcultural status and would become another boringly produced genre. The method at which this is accomplished is essentially gatekeeping.
I don't think breakcore will ever be completely mainstream. I don't think there's any risk of that. It's by design. I don't think that will ever happen. The more sort of technically minded, like the more aggressive, like purely sample driven, like mashcore kind of stuff, I think will always be niche just by virtue of how it sounds. It's too inaccessible. It's like worrying that, you know, harsh noise is going to become too popular. It's not going to happen.
The strategy for maintaining underground status involves alienating the inexperienced newbie consumer, as evidenced by the distinction between some monotonous loops and sometimes unpredictable changes and swifts. The former are easier to dance to, but for exactly this reason are to be avoided. And the sound of its own striving for uncompromising radicalism, breakcore reproduces an avant-garde ideal of authenticity. This particular statement is able to explain the reason why breakcore has been such a hotly contested genre within recent years. This statement explains the Dan Dormouse tweet, the gatekeeping culture backed by the phrase, "This isn't breakcore." From the view of the genre conservatives, the ethos of breakcore has been lost to the thing they fear the most, popularization. And this fear is guided by numerous reasons, the first of which being poser culture. In their eyes, breakcore has found its new home with edgy teens on TikTok wanting to be different. Enthusiasts are tired of this vapid, surface-level fad culture that took their genre, mislabeled it, and will eventually move on from it after getting bored. More importantly, the music was getting boring. But instead of the decontextualized Jamaican SoundCloud shouting of yore, breakcore was now home to breaks over atmospheric synths with serial experiments lane fan art. Breakcore was an underground cult that strived to push the limits of electronic music. It was a genre for the individual to express themselves with their background and come together under a common goal, to make the music crazier. All the things Wellen described in his review, tightness of the edits, the distorted breakbeats, the gabber kicks, sampling of both popular and obscure material, was gone in this modern cookie-cutter rendition. Does this small interaction on the vast web comment on the nature of Gen Z? Does it comment on their ability to recontextualize subcultures by merely aggregating them into a loose collection of aesthetics, thus watering down the appeal of the subculture? Did Gen Z ruin breakcore? I think the answer is a bit more nuanced than that. In one manner, you can't deny what has happened to breakcore is not good. It has been mislabeled under the latest revival of jungle and drum and bass music with a different aesthetic coat of paint. This isn't to demean the revival as something far worse. In fact, many of these new artists are making music that perfectly accomplishes the purpose of those genres, to be fun and danceable. Unfortunately, with breakcore, the ethos of the genre and its identity is based off experimental and creative production. For the genre to keep as authentic to that spirit as possible, it has to be kept somewhat underground. On the other hand, does it truly matter? Is it worth the effort to conserve the genre of breakcore? So many of these new listeners just want to enjoy the music, and they hate the gatekeepy old head nature that the genre has become known for.
Like when I started, there was also gatekeeping. You know what I mean? Like it's like people that were into that sort of like first wave of breakcore that I was talking about, the like politically charged 90s stuff. You know, they were like actively just trying to tell people like me, being like, you know, this what you're doing is not real breakcore or whatever. So like that already was a thing. You know, like when I did breakcore. So you know, I think nothing really has changed. It's just the generation has shifted. You know, like now the people that are of my era of breakcore, if you want to call it that, you know, are like shitting on people of like the new era of breakcore. So, you know, it's just, I don't know, it's nothing new in my opinion.
People don't like the phrase, "this isn't breakcore," because it's a buzzkill to the people who just want to have fun. Besides, what constitutes breakcore has been a hotly contested topic since the genre was first conceived in the small underground raves. We saw a similar attitude when the raggacore genre was out. Chapter 9.2 even showcases examples of artists explaining their distaste for an overused amen break, with some even going so far as to say that there was no proper etiquette to the use of amens in breakcore. In this perspective, issues such as keeping anime out of breakcore are very tame issues compared to what the genre has had to face back then. The misconception that these Y2K and anime influences cannot be put into breakcore has been proven wrong by a fresh slew of ambitious creators and labels. But at the end of the day, we have to understand that failing to grasp the history and the culture of breakcore results in the naive people calling even video game music breakcore. And at the same time, overcorrecting for these mistakes with excessive gatekeeping makes the genre too stagnant, and ironically makes it pretty boring. What people need to grasp is that there is more than meets the eye in the genre, and haphazardly thinking you know everything there is to know about it breeds ignorance. I say, just listen to the music and read Andrew Wellen's book. Well, you've made it. We've all made it. We've made it to the outro. We've made it to the end of the video. I wanted to make this outro just to clear up a few things about the old video, about references and credits to this video, and the future of this channel. First of all, I just wanted to give a special thanks to SE Dave for helping me with not only the process of researching this video, but also proofreading and helping me edit my scripts. This guy was here with me since the original video went kaput. I was immediately contacted with him, sent in contact with him on Twitter and on Discord, and he was happy to set me up with the interviews that you've seen in the video. Which, on another note, thank you to the interviewees. Thank you to Breakforce1, aka Gate System, and Puke Girl. Very, very insightful conversations and answers to questions that I'm sure we've all had. Uncut full interview sections will be put up on my second channel. If you want to see the credits for not only the music, but the references that I use, the research that I use, if you want to see Andrew Welland's book, if you want to see Essie Dave's and all the artists' music, there will be a link to a reference document down below in the description and in the pinned comments. Since I know there's a lot of songs in this video, it has the list of all the music used in the video by segment, in order of segment. So if you have a hard time trying to find something, it's pretty easy to just, hit over and reference it. The previous video about Breakcore will be unlisted for the sake of archive, frankly. For the sake of archive, I want people to see how I've grown as a YouTuber over the years. There will be an addendum added to the description and the pinned comment of that video. I'll do everything in my power to make sure that it's redirecting to the video that you just watched now. And thanks to everyone that just stuck by. It was a long, arduous journey. It took a lot of listening to music and a lot of research to accomplish this. And not everything's going to be right. I can already see it from miles away. There will be quarrels with my video, but at the end of the day, we all love Breakcore, and music's just awesome. What can I say?